Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My grandfather was a man of few words but infinite wisdom. Always know your boundaries, he'd tell me as we sat on his weathered dock, fishing rods in hand, watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant oranges and pinks. Not just in life, son, but on your property too. I never fully appreciated what he meant until 3 years after his passing, when I inherited his Lakeside property and found myself in the crosshairs of the most notorious HOA in the county. The property itself was nothing spectacular by modern standards, a modest cabin with a large deck, a slightly sloping yard that led down to the wooden dock where I'd spent countless hours learning to fish as a kid. What made it special wasn't its appearance, but its location. Prime lakefront real estate with unobstructed views and deep water access. The kind of place developers drool over and wealthy people pay millions for. My grandfather had purchased it in the 1970s, long before the surrounding land was developed into what would become the exclusive lakeside community that now bordered my property on 3 sides. When developers came knocking in the 90s, wanting to incorporate his land into their planned community, he politely but firmly declined. They offered him good money, my father told me after the funeral. But your grandfather said some things aren't for sale. The look on that developer's face, priceless. Instead, my grandfather kept his little slice of paradise exactly as he wanted it. Natural, a bit wild, and completely his own. The large oak trees he refused to cut down, the native plants he encouraged rather than replaced with manicured lawns, and the sturdy but admittedly weathered dock that jutted out into the water, all of it stood in stark contrast to the precisely landscaped properties surrounding it. For the first few months after inheriting the place, I visited on weekends, finding solace in the quiet mornings on the lake, and the memories that lived in every corner of the cabin. It was during one of these peaceful Saturdays that I first encountered her, the woman who would become the bane of my existence for the next 8 months. I was on the dock, casting my line into the still morning water, when I heard someone clearing their throat behind me. Turning around, I found a woman in her 50s, dressed in what I can only describe as casual country club attire, standing at the edge of my property with a folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning," I said, setting my rod down. "Can I help you?" "Yes," she replied, her voice clipped. "I'm the new head of the Architectural Review Committee for the Homeowners Association. We've had several complaints about the condition of your property." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, but this property isn't part of your HOA. She looked at me as if I'd just told her the earth was flat. "All properties in this development are subject to our covenants. I have here a list of violations that need to be addressed immediately." She opened her folder and began reading. Unapproved dock structure, excessive natural vegetation, lack of proper lawn maintenance, unauthorized boat storage. "Ma'am," I interrupted as politely as I could, "I understand there might be some confusion, but my grandfather never joined your HOA. This property predates your development and has always been independently owned." Her eyes narrowed. "That's simply not possible. The entire lakefront is part of our community." "Not this piece," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "If you'd like, I can show you the property documents." "That won't be necessary," she said, closing her folder with a snap. "I'll look into this matter and get back to you. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you begin addressing these issues. The association takes its standards very seriously." With that, she turned and strode away, leaving me standing there with my fishing rod and a growing sense of unease. I didn't think much of it at first, just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up once she checked the records. I was wrong. The following weekend, I found an unofficial-looking notice taped to my cabin door listing violations and required corrections with a deadline of 2 weeks. I removed it and went about my day, making a mental note to find my grandfather's property documents when I got home. It was the 3rd weekend when things escalated. I was grilling some fish I'd caught earlier that day when a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers approached, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, setting down my spatula. "What can I do for you?" "We received a call about a trespasser," one of them explained. "Someone reported an unauthorized person using private community property." I couldn't help but laugh. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm the owner of this property. My grandfather left it to me when he passed away 3 years ago. They asked for identification, which I provided, along with the deed to the property that I'd wisely brought with me after the previous weekend's notice." "Sorry about this," the older officer said after examining my documents. "Looks like a misunderstanding." As they were leaving, I spotted her, the HOA committee head, watching from the road, her arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't approach, just observed as the police departed, then turned and walked away. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next month, I received more notices, then official-looking fines for non-compliance, then a certified letter claiming the HOA had placed a lien on my property for unpaid dues and violation fees. Each weekend brought new harassment, neighbors dropping by to mention how much nicer the area would look if I kept up with standards, anonymous complaints to various county departments about supposed code violations, and twice more, police responding to calls about suspicious activity. During one of these visits, while showing the increasingly apologetic local officers my property documents yet again, I noticed something interesting on my grandfather's old survey map. According to his meticulously marked boundaries, the tasteful stone path that ran along the lakeshore, the one used by all HOA residents for their evening constitutionals, appeared to cut across the corner of my property for about 30 feet. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's words, "Always know your boundaries." The next morning, instead of fishing, I walked the property line, using his old survey markers as a guide. What I found made me smile for the first time in weeks. Not only did their precious walking path encroach on my land, but the southeastern corner of their recently constructed community gazebo, a lavish lakeside structure where they held their summer socials, was definitely undeniably sitting on my property by about 4 feet. Monday morning, I called a professional surveyor. Wednesday, I met with a lawyer. By Friday, I had an officially updated survey and a cease and desist letter ready to go. That Saturday, when the HOA committee head made her now predictable appearance to inform me that the board had voted to take action regarding my unsafe dock structure, I was ready. "Before you continue," I said calmly, "I have something for you." I handed her the cease and desist letter. "What's this?" she asked, not opening it. "A formal notice to stop harassing me and to remove your encroachments from my property within 30 days. "Encroachments? What are you talking about?" I smiled. "Your walking path and community gazebo are partially on my land. It's all explained in the letter, along with the updated survey results. I've been more than patient with the false police reports, the invalid fines, and the illegal liens, but this ends now." Her face went through a fascinating transformation: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, something close to panic. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "That gazebo cost the association over $30,000 to build last year." "Then I suggest you start figuring out how to move it," I replied, "or we can discuss a reasonable easement fee. My lawyer's contact information is in the letter." She stormed off, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. The next week brought an emergency HOA meeting to which I was not invited, but heard about through a sympathetic neighbor who'd grown tired of the board's heavy-handed tactics. They discussed legal options, discovered they had none, and finally sent their lawyer to negotiate with mine. Their initial offer was laughable, a one-time payment of $500 for an easement. My counteroffer made them choke: $10,000 for the gazebo encroachment plus $200 monthly for the pathway, or remove both entirely. While this was ongoing, I documented everything: every unlawful fine, every false police report, every piece of harassment. When they sent a landscaping committee to assess my property, really to take photos they could use against me, I caught them on camera stepping onto my land without permission. The situation reached its climax 3 months in, when I arrived one Friday evening to find a notice taped to my dock stating it would be removed as an unsafe structure the following Monday. There was no permit, no legal order, just the HOA letterhead and the committee head's signature. That was the final straw. My lawyer filed for an emergency injunction and included all our documented evidence of harassment. The judge not only granted it, but expressed strong concerns about the HOA actions. The following week, I received a call from a different HOA board member, asking if we could meet to resolve the situation amicably. I agreed, and we met at a local coffee shop, neutral territory. "Look," he said, looking genuinely embarrassed, "this has gotten out of hand. Several board members had no idea how far this had gone. We'd like to settle this without further legal action." Their new offer? They would remove the encroaching portion of the gazebo, pay for all surveying and legal costs I'd incurred, formally acknowledge my property's independent status, and issue a written apology. In exchange, I would grant them a limited easement for the pathway for a reasonable annual fee. I accepted with 2 additional conditions. The board member who had been harassing me had to resign, and the HOA had to stop making false reports to the police. Within a month, the agreement was signed. The offending board member resigned rather than face potential legal consequences for the harassment campaign she'd led. The partial demolition and reconstruction of their gazebo cost the HOA over $15,000, a fact that did not make her popular among her neighbors. As summer turned to fall, an interesting thing happened. Without the constant threat of fines and violations, several other homeowners began to push back against some of the HOA more restrictive policies. Native plant gardens started appearing. A movement to reduce water usage by limiting lawn watering gained traction. One Sunday afternoon, as I was cleaning my catch for the day, a hesitant knock on my cabin door surprised me. A family with 2 young children stood there, looking nervous. "Sorry to bother you," the father said, "but our kids were wondering if that's a real fishing dock. They've never been fishing before." I smiled, remembering countless similar moments with my grandfather. "It sure is. Would they like to learn?" The children's eyes lit up. That was the beginning of something unexpected. Over the next year, my previously eyesore property became something of a neighborhood gathering spot. I started hosting informal fishing lessons on Saturday mornings. A retired biologist from down the street offered nature walks, teaching kids about the native plants my grandfather had so carefully preserved. The HOA still exists, still enforces its rules, but there's been a subtle shift in the community. People wave when they walk by on the path, for which the association now dutifully pays an annual easement fee. Some stop to chat or ask fishing advice. Last month, I found an envelope in my mailbox containing a check from the police department's community fund and a note explaining it was compensation for the unnecessary calls and checks they'd conducted at the HOA behest. I used the money to rebuild the steps leading down to the dock, making them safer for the neighbor kids who now regularly visit. My grandfather would have approved. As I sit on the dock now, watching the sun set over the lake, just as I did with him years ago, I often think about boundaries, not just the physical ones that protect my property, but the ones that define who we are and what we stand for. "Always know your boundaries," he'd said. Now I understand he wasn't just talking about property lines, but about knowing what you value and being willing to defend it. Thanks to his foresight, the carefully marked survey, the detailed records, the deliberate decision to remain independent, I was able to preserve something special, not just for myself, but for others to enjoy as well. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's creating something better in the aftermath. My grandfather knew that too. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My former boss is the worst human being I've ever met. He did all sorts of things to mess with anyone he didn't like. So a while ago, I was at a family event in a local park, walking with a young boy from our family who is developmentally disabled with Down syndrome, Ben. Ben does fairly well, all things considered, but he's always been sensitive to anyone making fun of the way he looks or his condition. We are just having a good time on our little stroll, Ben and I both enjoying the day. Along comes my boss walking toward us. I'll call him Rob. I cringe at seeing him but smile and say hello to play nice. Rob. "There's something you don't see every day. A pair of ugly retards walking together." Ben bursts into tears as Rob laughs and walks off. I deal with Ben and ignore Rob. I'm super pissed and trying to calm Ben down because for a few minutes he was totally distraught. Finally, I get Ben to focus on how he has me and a lot of other awesome friends and family and that Rob is a stranger and what he thinks doesn't matter. We walked some more and I saw that Rob was at the park with his wife and teen daughter having a cookout, and he had apparently been on his way back to his family from a trip to the toilet when he saw us. Back to being super pissed. I went back to our gathering and talked to an adult cousin of mine, Jake, telling him what happened. Jake wanted to get revenge on Rob, but I reminded him that this was my boss. I didn't want Rob to be able to know the revenge had anything to do with me because then he'd make my work life even worse than he already had. So Jake asked me for anything I knew about Rob that might help. I told Jake a bunch of things about Rob, but the relevant info here is that Rob liked to drink a particular kind of locally made beer at a certain bar. Rob had talked of having drank there on the previous Friday night while his wife and daughter were away visiting her family. Also, Rob had recently told a story at work about his wife's obsession with a particular little green fictional character. Let's call it Yabi Boda. Turns out his wife kept a stuffed Yabi Boda on their bed at all times. I wasn't there for the revenge setup itself because I didn't want Rob to see me, but Jake filled in the details afterward. It was basically this. Jake approached Rob and put an arm around his shoulders and tried to kiss him. Rob pushes him off. Rob. "What are you doing?" Rob's family is now paying attention. Jake. "I am just so excited to see you, sweetie. Friday night was so amazing." Rob. "What are you talking about?" Jake. "Seriously, you're going to act like you don't remember now?" I know you were a bit tipsy after all of those specific local beers at the local bar, but certainly you remember what happened later. Rob, nothing happened later, or ever. I don't even know your name. Jake, really? You were screaming it on Friday. Rob, turning red. You lying son of a... Rob's wife, interrupting. Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is my husband. I'm sure you have him mistaken for someone else. Please just leave us alone. Jake. Oh no, I'm not mistaken. We had the best sex ever on Friday night, and now he's acting like he doesn't even know me. Rob's wife. I told you, this is my husband. You're mistaken. Jake. Oh, maybe I am. I guess it was someone else who took me back to his place on Rob Street and had great sex with me on the bed right next to Yabi Boda. Sorry. Jake turns and walks away. Rob's wife. Oh my god! Rob, WTF is wrong with you? You're gay now? Really? Already long story made a bit shorter, Rob's wife wasn't real happy with him anyway, and this was apparently the tipping point that made her file for divorce soon thereafter. Rob frequently complained at work in the following months about how he didn't care about his wife but really missed his daughter and how much it sucked to live in his new place compared to his old home. Every time he complained about his lack of a home life at work, I knew he did it to himself when he was mean to a developmentally disabled kid. The best part is he never figured out I was involved at all. The next one is an entitled people's story. I'm 26, work in marketing, and have always prided myself on being financially responsible. I pay my bills on time, have an emergency fund, and try to live within my means. About a year and a half ago, I needed a new living situation after my previous roommate moved in with their partner. Enter my roommate. Let's just call them my roommate for privacy reasons. We met through a mutual friend, and everything seemed normal at first. They had a steady job at a tech company, seemed clean enough during my first visit to check out the apartment, and we got along well in our initial conversations. The apartment was a decent 2-bedroom in a nice area of the city, and the rent was reasonable when split, about $1,800 total, so $900 each. For the first 3 months, everything was fine. We'd occasionally cook meals together, respected each other's space, and had a good system for dividing household responsibilities. I handled the lease since I had better credit, but they were added as a tenant. I'd collect both our portions of the rent and transfer the full amount to our landlord's account each month. But then things started to change. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. It started with small things. They'd use my expensive shampoo without asking. They'd forget to buy toilet paper when it was their turn. Their dirty dishes would pile up for days. When I'd bring these things up, they'd act like I was being unreasonable. It's just a little shampoo, what's the big deal? They'd say. I'll get toilet paper next time, stop being so uptight. Then it escalated. They started having friends over multiple times a week, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. on weeknights when they knew I had to be up early for work. They'd eat food I had specifically labeled as mine in the fridge. I was hungry and didn't have time to go to the store, they'd explain with a shrug. I'll replace it tomorrow. They rarely did. About 9 months into our lease, I had a work crisis. A major client campaign was floundering, and I had to fly out for an emergency meeting the next day. I had just withdrawn my portion of the rent, $900 in cash, and put it in the envelope I kept in my desk drawer. I hadn't had time to transfer it to the landlord yet because I was rushing to pack and prepare for the trip. I'll be back in 2 days, I told my roommate as I rushed out the door with my overnight bag. Everything okay here? Yeah, fine, they said without looking up from their phone. Have a good trip or whatever. When I returned, exhausted but relieved that we'd saved the campaign, something felt off as soon as I walked in. The apartment was messier than usual, with empty beer bottles and pizza boxes strewn about. Clearly, they'd had people over while I was gone. Annoyed but too tired to deal with it right then, I went to my room to unpack. That's when I noticed my desk drawer was slightly ajar. I pulled it open and immediately felt my stomach drop. The envelope with my rent money was still there, but when I picked it up, I knew it was empty before I even looked inside. I stormed out to the living room where my roommate was lounging on the couch watching TV. Did you take the money from my desk drawer? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. They barely glanced up. What money? You know exactly what money. $900 cash that was in an envelope in my desk drawer. They shrugged, still staring at the TV. Oh, that! Yeah, I borrowed it. I had a bit of an emergency. I was going to tell you, but you weren't here. I was floored by their casual attitude. You stole $900 from my room without asking? That got their attention. They sat up, suddenly defensive. I didn't steal anything. We live together. I'm going to pay it back before rent is due. It's not a big deal. What was the emergency? I demanded. They hesitated. Just money stuff, bills and things. I'll pay you back in a week, I promise. I was furious but also in a bind. Rent was due in 10 days, and I needed to make sure it was paid on time. I ended up having to dip into my emergency savings to cover the amount they'd taken. A week passed. No money. Then another. Rent was now due in 2 days. "Where's my money?" I asked one evening when they came home. They sighed dramatically. "Look, things are tight right now. I can give you $100 now and then maybe $100 each month until it's paid off." 9 months to pay back what you stole? Absolutely not. Rent is due in 2 days. "You already paid it, right? So what's the problem? I'll pay you back eventually." That's when I noticed something. They were wearing brand new expensive headphones, and there was a shopping bag from a high-end clothing store by the door. "Was your emergency a shopping spree?" I asked incredulously. They had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but only for a moment. "I needed those things for work, and I got tickets to see my favorite band next month. It was a limited sale. I couldn't miss it." "So you stole my rent money for concert tickets and shopping?" "You're overreacting," they said, rolling their eyes. "That's what roommates are for, to help each other out. You make more money than me anyway." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I want a written agreement that you'll pay me back by the end of the month. All of it." They agreed reluctantly, and I drafted a simple repayment agreement, which they signed. Needless to say, the end of the month came and went with no payment. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other things missing. Small amounts of cash from my wallet, a pair of earrings, my favorite sweater. I began to suspect that this wasn't the first time they'd taken things from me, just the first time I'd caught them. I decided to set up a small security camera in my room hidden on my bookshelf. I wasn't sure if it was legal, but I needed to know if I was crazy or if my suspicions were correct. Sure enough, 2 days later, the camera caught them entering my room while I was at work, going through my drawers and pocketing a $20 bill from the small dish where I kept loose change. I was livid, but I decided not to confront them immediately. I needed to figure out my next move carefully. In the meantime, their behavior got even worse. They invited a friend to crash on our couch, just for a few days, without discussing it with me. That turned into 2 weeks. "They're going through a rough patch," my roommate explained. "Don't be selfish." Then I started hearing from mutual friends that my roommate was bad-mouthing me, saying I was controlling and obsessed with money. One friend messaged me, "Why are you being so hard on them? They said you're threatening to kick them out if they don't pay for everything in the apartment." It was infuriating to be painted as the villain when I was the one being stolen from. The final straw came when I received a call from our landlord. "I've received several complaints about noise and parties coming from your unit," he said sternly. "This is the 3rd complaint this month. If it continues, we'll have to reconsider your lease renewal." I hadn't been home during any of these alleged parties. When I confronted my roommate, they dismissed it. "The neighbors are just uptight. It wasn't even that loud." A few days later, our utility bills arrived. They were unusually high. "Your friend has been staying here for weeks, running up our water and electricity bills," I pointed out. "You need to cover the difference." "I'm a little short this month," they said. "Can you just cover it and I'll pay you back later?" Given their track record of paying back later, I refused. We argued, and they eventually stormed out. That night, I sat in my room, feeling trapped and frustrated. I knew I couldn't continue living like this, constantly on guard in my own home, being taken advantage of financially, and watching my reputation get dragged through the mud. That's when I decided to take action. The next day, while my roommate was at work, I called our landlord and asked about my options for getting out of the lease. "Well," he said after reviewing our agreement, "there's a clause that states if one tenant wants to leave, but another remains, they can be removed from the lease with 30 days' notice, as long as the remaining tenant qualifies to maintain the lease on their own income." A plan began to form in my mind. I asked for the paperwork to remove myself from the lease and thanked him. "By the way," I added, "those noise complaints, they were all from when my roommate had parties while I was away, and they've had an unauthorized guest staying for weeks." The landlord wasn't happy to hear this. "I'll make a note of that," he said. "And between you and me, if you're looking for a new place, I have another property that will have a vacancy next month. Smaller, but maybe that's what you need." This was perfect. I began my secret exit strategy. First, I started looking for a new place to live, eventually settling on the unit my landlord had mentioned. A nice one-bedroom that was actually $200 cheaper than my half of the current rent. Next, I began quietly moving my most important possessions, documents, family heirlooms, expensive electronics, to a storage unit I rented. I did this gradually so my roommate wouldn't notice things disappearing. I also documented everything. The theft caught on camera, the unauthorized guest, screenshots of the noise complaints. I compiled it all in a folder just in case. To keep my roommate from discovering my plan, I told them I was planning a weekend trip to visit my parents in a few weeks. In reality, that would be my final moving day. "Must be nice to be able to afford all these trips," they commented snidely when I mentioned it. The next few weeks were tense but manageable because I knew I had an exit plan. I kept interactions minimal and avoided any new conflicts. I paid my share of utilities despite their refusal to contribute fairly, knowing it would be the last time. On the Thursday before my weekend trip, I had my new apartment keys in hand. I had already moved most of my belongings gradually, and friends were scheduled to help with the furniture on Saturday when my roommate would be at a day-long concert, the one bought with my stolen money, ironically enough. That Saturday morning, they left early for the concert. As soon as they were gone, my friends arrived with a small moving truck, and we quickly loaded up my bed, desk, dresser, and the few remaining boxes. By early afternoon, we were done. My room was empty except for the old curtains and a few random items I didn't care about. On the kitchen counter, I left 3 things: my keys, the official letter removing myself from the lease, already processed and approved by the landlord, and a short note. As per my conversation with the landlord and the lease agreement, I've removed myself from the lease effective today. Your portion of next month's rent, $900, is due on the 1st, and the full rent, $1,800, will be your responsibility going forward, as will all utilities. Consider the $900 you stole from me your last loan. Do not contact me further. I also blocked their number and social media as soon as I left. Of course, they still tried to reach me. They had mutual friends call me. They showed up at my workplace once, but security didn't let them in. Eventually, they sent a rambling email alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas for me to come back and help with the rent. I replied with a single line, "I have video evidence of you stealing from me multiple times. Contact me again, and I'll take it to the police." That finally shut them up. Through mutual friends, I heard the fallout over the following weeks. My ex-roommate couldn't afford the full rent on their own. They tried to find a replacement roommate quickly, but the landlord, now aware of their history, required an additional security deposit that no one was willing to pay. They were eventually evicted for non-payment of rent 3 months later. About 6 months after I moved out, I was shopping at a store across town and spotted them working behind the counter. They saw me too, and their face flushed with recognition and embarrassment. I simply nodded politely and continued shopping. I didn't need to say anything. Their situation spoke for itself. My new apartment is peaceful. It's smaller, but it's all mine. I've rebuilt my emergency savings and even started a vacation fund with the money I'm saving on rent. Sometimes I think about how much stress and anxiety I endured in those last months at the old apartment, and I wish I'd stood up for myself sooner. But I learned valuable lessons. Trust your instincts when something feels off. Document everything, know your rights as a tenant, and most importantly, don't let entitled people take advantage of your kindness. They rarely change, and they'll drain you emotionally and financially if you let them. In the end, I came out on top, and they learned the hard way that actions have consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate scheme. It's simply stepping away and letting someone face the natural results of their own behavior. And if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that karma eventually comes calling, even if it takes a while to arrive. The next one is a malicious compliances story. I am in college and studying for my extended diploma in art and design. I have a teacher this year who is all about conceptual art and has never drawn a day in her life. To keep this short, I will just list the things she had done before. Told me that my drawings are just copies and not real art. Told me that anime isn't art and I need to be more realistic. Told my class to use AI art. Told me that my portfolio for university was not enough of me and to remove some of my best work. To put it lightly, this woman gets on my nerves. We were doing an industry-linked project with a local business during our practice project before our final major. She had arranged a visit for the head of the company to come and see our artwork as we were in lesson. She spent 3/4 of an hour looking at 2 people's work in specific, there is 9 of us in that class, and then eventually came over to me and my friends. We all specialize in character creation and concept art, looking at a lot of different animation and cartoons and using those styles. She brought over this woman and said, "These are our character creators, they all really like anime, but we're trying to get them to move away from that and look at some real art." We were shocked that she would just discredit our work in front of the woman who employed us to do work for her business. "I am now on our final project," she had told me multiple times on our previous project that you can't just do research on things you like, you need to broaden your research, so I decided to do just that. I made an entire research page on conceptual art and went into detail discussing an artist's themes and exploring the style of her work and saying how to me it doesn't make sense and that I don't have the same love for it as it seems illogical. I used a lot of points to back up my views and made sure that she couldn't turn it against me. We are also being taken on a trip to a conceptual art gallery that I will be doing the exact same with. She spent the first half of this year discrediting all my hard work and style, so now I will discredit hers. She has seen the research page but didn't even bother to properly read it, but she said how she likes that I've put myself more open to look at different artists. She had seen how I had spoken about it in her brief look over my work and quickly moved on to the next table, completely forgetting to look at the others' work on my table, but they didn't care and didn't want to talk to her anyway. I hope she knows how much we all don't like her way of teaching. The next one is an entitled Parent's Story. Let's start this off with some context. 23, I met my now fiancé, Jay. Her mom moved her estate away with her alcoholic boyfriend and starved her kids and became a much worse alcoholic then before ... they left and moved in with their dad closer to me. 2024, her dad gets into drugs, and he becomes very angry. We move back in with her mom. I'm living with them at this point as a father figure. Since we moved in, her mom has very quickly plummeted to rock bottom. It went from going to her new boyfriend's house once a week to being there all week, leaving us to parent her twins, both 13. Mother recently came into money, $200K, and seems to believe she can buy the world. She's bought 4 cars, a plot of land, a whole lot of vodka, some toys to go four-wheeling, and dozens of other poor investments. All of the vehicles and toys have blown up and are no longer working. Fast forward to today, me and my fiancé got our own apartment 2 months ago. Her birthday came up last week, so we all celebrated at our apartment, except for her mother, who instead got extremely drunk, ran down the street, cussed out neighbors out, and blew up the 4th car. Refused to spend time with her daughter on her 18th birthday. This upset her, but we let it go because it was over and there was no going back. She left the house, the kids, and her cancer-ridden mother for a week to go ATV riding with her POS boyfriend, and when she got back today, she forgot the kids at school, drank herself to sleep, and when they woke her up for dinner, told the twins she hated them and to go back to their fathers. She now has no vehicles, and we are forced to watch her kids, her mother, and the house by ourselves for God knows how long while she's in another city. I have no clue how to move forward. Me and Jay need to move forward and start our own life. But we can't in good conscience leave the twins, or put them in foster care. We want the best for them, and their mother, but we cannot keep parent them, and taking all of the responsibility at 18 and 19. We have stayed maybe 8 days in our place out of the 60 that we've had it because we can't leave them alone. What should I do? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.